Well, good morning. Happy Wednesday to you. Wednesday, June 26th, 2024. And I am still wearing my same shirt that I was wearing last time because I'm pre-recording this. I am having breakfast with somebody this morning, and it's in Phoenix. So I'm pre-recording this on Tuesday and uploading it so it's ready to go for all of you on Wednesday. So let me just put my timer up so I can kind of gauge how much time I have here, because sometimes, it goes long. But anyway, happy day to you. I'm assuming it's a beautiful day today, and we don't have any birthdays today. We'll have a birthday. We'll go through the birthdays tomorrow, but we don't have any birthdays today. And I could tell you that it's a beautiful day outside, but I don't really know for sure that it's a beautiful day outside. So I think what I'll do is we'll just go ahead and get into the study. We are in 1 Kings chapter 7. We left off at verse 26, where we talked about the huge bronze pillars that were placed in front of the temple. And I was doing some research on those bronze pillars. I came across a Wikipedia article that says, according to the Bible, Boaz and Yakin were two copper, bronze, or brass pillars which stood on the porch of Solomon's temple, in the first temple. They're used as symbols in Freemasonry. And that's interesting. And sometimes in religious architecture. They were probably not support structures, but were freestanding based on similar pillars found in other nearby temples. So there is some sort of adornment for the front of the temple, not for strength, but to just have something that looked fascinating. The pillars were 6 feet thick and 27 feet tall. The 8-foot high brass chapiters or capitals on top of the pillars bore decorations in brass of lilies. The original measurements as taken from the Torah was in cubits, which record that the pillars were 18 cubits high and 12 cubits around and hollow. And I thought that they might be hollow, which records that the pillars were 18 cubits high, 4 fingers thick. That's from Jeremiah. Nets of checker work covered the bowls of each chapiter, decorated with rows of 200 pomegranates, wreathed with 7 chains for each chapiter, and topped with lilies. The bronze pillars did not survive the destruction of the first temple. So when they destroyed the first temple in Jeremiah, everything was destroyed, including these incredibly beautiful pillars. The Chaldeans broke up the bronze columns of the house of the Lord. The pillars were carried away in pieces for ease of transportation. When the second temple was built, the pillars were not returned, and there exists no record of new pillars being constructed to replace them. So that would make for an interesting story, is that perhaps somewhere in the ancient Near East, someone does an archaeological dig and comes across the pieces of the bronze pillars, right? That would be kind of cool. And there's arguments about which one is on the right and which one's on the left. And there's apparently a lot of different uses of these pillars. Obviously, Freemasonry, which was that, free-weight masonry was pretty popular in the 18th, 19th century in Europe, maybe even the United States. It was kind of a group of men that came together and, had secret rituals and stuff like that. And so apparently the pillars were part of that. And that was kind of interesting. I wonder if any modern uses of those pillars exist. But there's all sorts of things. There's been books written about them. Anime series has them. There's the guy that wrote Da Vinci Code. Was it Dan Brown that wrote Da Vinci Code? I think it was. Robert Langdon, the archaeologist. Apparently, the villain in one of the books, called The Lost Symbol, has these 2 pillars tattooed on his legs. So they're kind of, there's a little bit of a folklore going around about them, but they don't exist anymore. Once Solomon's temple was destroyed, they don't exist. All right, so let's continue reading in verse 27 of chapter 7. He also made 10 movable stands of bronze. Each was 4 cubits long, 4 wide, and 3 high. This is how the stands were made. They had side panels attached to uprights, and on the panels between the uprights were lions, bulls, and cherubim, and on the uprights as well. Above and below the lions and bulls were wreaths of hammered work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles, and each had a basin resting on 4 supports, cast with wreaths on each side. And on the inside of the stand, there was an opening that had a circular frame, 1 cubit deep. This opening was round, and with its base work, it measured 1.5 cubits. Around its opening, there was an engraving. The panels of the stands were square and not round. The 4 wheels were under the panels, and the axles of the wheels were attached to the stand. The diameter of each wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like chariot wheels. The axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all cast of metal. So, pretty detailed description of this. Bronze axles for the stands had an opening. Not entirely sure why there's so much detail here, but probably just to give an account of what it looked like and try to describe as best as it could what the different pieces of this were. At this time, I'm trying to think of what language would have been available. There would have been some language available. So somebody probably, had some inscriptions of what it looked like, and then it eventually got written down as to what it looked like, or maybe even was written down at the time of the kings. Verse 34, each stand had 4 handles, 1 on each corner, projecting from the stand. At the top of the stand, there was a circular band 0.5 cubit deep. The supports and panels were attached to the top of the stand. He engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the surface of the supports and on the panels in every available space with wreaths all around. And this is why he made the 10 stands. They were all cast in the same molds and were identical in size and shape. So this guy must have been pretty good with bronze, and obviously brought into, this is Huram. Let me go back and see. That was verse 37. Let's see. Yeah, he went to Tyre. So King Solomon sent to Tyre to get this guy named Huram, Huram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali. So he's Jewish, but he lives up in Tyre. And his father was from Tyre, and he was a skilled craftsman in bronze. So Huram was brought down to Jerusalem to do all this bronze casting work, and very, very well known for his ability to work with this metal, obviously. And so these must have been stunningly beautiful. And so Solomon gave him a workshop and bronze and all the raw materials that he would need to do all these castings and make beautiful fixtures for the inside of the palace, and perhaps for the inside of other places also. Verse 38. He then made 10 bronze basins, each holding 40 baths and measuring 4 cubits across, one basin to go on each of the 10 stands. He placed 5 of the stands on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He placed the sea on the south side of the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the pots and the shovels and the sprinkling bowls. So everything that was necessary to do all the temple worship and sacrifices, and everything that was necessary for King Solomon to do the grandeur, they brought all this guy in to do all the work. Verse 40b. So Huram finished all the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord, the 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 10 stands with their 10 basins, the sea, the 12 bowls under it, the pots, shovels, and sprinkling bowls. All of these objects that Huram made for King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Sukkoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all these things unweighed because there were so many. The weight of the bronze was not determined. So it looks like instead of using sand to cast the bronze, they took clay and, fashioned, probably, who knows how this, but you might take clay and fashion what it is that you want to do and then surround it with sand, or that's typically kind of how that works, right? And then you get rid of the clay, or somehow you get the clay out of there, and you pull this apart and put it back together again and pour it with bronze. Those are techniques that I don't know very much about, but probably some of you do. They were in burnished bronze. They must have been beautiful. Verse 48, Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in the Lord's temple, the golden altar, the golden table on which the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left in front of the inner sanctuary, the gold floral work and lamps and tongs, the pure gold basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers, and the gold sockets for the doors of the innermost room, the most holy place, and also for the doors of the main hall of the temple. And when the work of King Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold of the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. So he does all this stuff and places them in the temple. Now, what's interesting is that when houses of worship started to be constructed in the Roman Empire, and this would be, it wasn't legal until after 317 AD, after the Edict of Milan, but somewhere after 317, they started building churches and they started building cathedrals. And they said, okay, if we're going to build a cathedral for God, what should it look like? And so they went back into the Old Testament. And so oftentimes you'll find things in a cathedral in Christianity that harkens back to some of these things, censers, incense, all the different things that exist that would have been in the temple of the Lord back in Solomon's day. Some of those things find their way into Christian art in the modern Christian era. Now, after Jesus died, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, and sacrifices were no longer needed because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice. He's the prophet, the priest, and the king. He was the perfect sacrifice. And all sacrifices in the Old Testament, the New Testament, everything that was sacrificed points to Jesus. So in the Old Testament, it would be the bulls and the goats. In the New Testament, it is communion, where we remember the sacrifice of Jesus and we reflect back to his perfect sacrifice for us. Those are the things that are no longer necessary because we don't need the curtain of the temple was torn in two. So Jesus was the perfect sacrifice. No other sacrifice is needed. He is the perfect sacrifice. And so in the New Testament, when we celebrate Holy Communion, that harkens back to this perfect sacrifice of Jesus. And that's what we do. But we don't need the temple anymore. No temple is needed. And so if we build a building, it can certainly have reminiscence of the artifacts in the temple, but they're not necessary because Jesus said that the temple of God is his church, the people of God who are alive today. We are his temple. And the sacrifice that Jesus is looking for isn't the sacrifice of blood and of goats and bulls, but the sacrifice of a righteous life living for God. It's according to Romans, right? That's our true spiritual worship. Is it Romans 6? Anyway, that's now our sacrifice is God being pleased by the works we do to support him and his work in the kingdom. That's now the sacrifice. So we don't need a temple anymore to do. The bottom line is we don't need a temple anymore to do the sacrifice. We are the sacrifice. We, by our hands and feet working for Jesus, doing the things that he's called us to do, that's the perfect sacrifice that he's looking for from us. And then the perfection of that sacrifice is the perfect sacrifice of Jesus on the cross when he came and dwelt among us. So there's still sacrifice. It just looks differently. And you don't need a temple. Jesus never built a temple. He never said we needed to build a temple. That was Paul that in the missionary journeys, he established churches, and some of those churches built buildings and house churches and all those sort of things. And all of that, as Christianity expanded, there were, administrative centers of Christianity that were built, and obviously churches were built and cathedrals were built. But at its root, we don't need the temple anymore because Jesus is the perfect temple. We're the perfect temple that houses the Holy Spirit inside of us. So that's what we do. 5:20, yeah, okay, all right. So let's see, what else? He brought the things that David had collected and put them in the temple. So the temple must have been pretty impressive. It's got all this beautiful bronze work and gold inlay and, the parts of the temple, cedar. But now he's done. He's done with his palace. He's done with the temple. He's done with everything that he wanted to build for God. And you'll remember some of these things, like the table of the bread and presence. That was from the, if you'll remember in the Old Testament prior to this, when they had the tabernacle that they would set up and carry with them. In the outer portion of the tabernacle, they would have the lampstands, and they would have the bread of presence. All these things existed in the tabernacle. You even had the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is no longer needed anymore. Remember, the tabernacle was this cloth tent that housed all the things of God that they could put up. And now all that goes away, and you have the temple. I went to, this was in Houston, Texas. One of the churches had brought in this traveling tabernacle that they would set up on your property, and then people could come and take a look at the tabernacle. And it was pretty cool. And if that ever happens again, if there's an opportunity for you to see the tabernacle, you should really go see it. It really puts a face on what it looks like. And what would be really, really cool is if we had a temple, like a duplicate of the temple. You couldn't, because it would be so huge that it would be almost impossible to build. But maybe you could do a 20th scale of it or something like that and see what it looked like. And that would be kind of cool. Obviously, it says it's got these furnishings. We don't know exactly what they look like, but we could, at least we've got some dimensions of it. We could estimate the dimensions of it and kind of make an artist rendition of what it looks like. And that would be really cool. Even down to the tongs and the wick trimmers and the sprinkling bowls, and all the different things that you need for the tabernacle and we now need for the temple. All those things, as we furnish the temple. Pretty cool. All right, let me move on to the next chapter, see where we're going. I think the next story deserves its own day. So we'll kind of end today. It might be a little bit early, but thank you for joining me, and we'll get together tomorrow. I'll be live in person. It won't be this pre-recording, and we'll finish off and see what else goes into the temple, and we'll go from there. All right. So I guess let's close in prayer. Gracious God, thanks for this day. Until we meet again, keep us in your grace. All right. So again, thank you for joining me. Have a great day in the Lord, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.